Essentially, Boot is advocating a new form of fascism.
You know what that's called? That's not freedom of speech. That's fascism. That's communism. That's what they do in China.
I mean, if you can't see the threat here, if you can't see the socially fascistic threat here, I don't know what you're watching.
We are being turned into a Marxist, communist, socialist country right in front of our faces.
Yeah, I think it was George Orwell who described socialism as a boot, perhaps he could have said a max boot, stamping on a human face forever. And fascism, which is one variation of socialism, is when the government works in collusion with private industry and private agencies to carry out the state's bidding. So this is basically what Boot is advocating. He's calling for the government, through the FCC, to muzzle the political critics, the most influential political organ that is critical of the Biden administration. And this is a pure undermining of the kind of give and take of criticism that is essential to the democratic process. Essentially, Boot is advocating a new form of fascism.
You know what that's called? That's not freedom of speech. That's fascism. That's communism. That's what they do in China. You just get news from the government, what they want you to hear. Look, we believe in the Constitution, you know, freedom of speech for both sides. Yeah. You know, right to bear arms, limited government. What's radical about that? You called us radical, a radical conservative. That's an oxymoron, you moron. Yeah, those two don't even go together. Radical conservative. Everything that conservatism believe in, you can't have fascism. You can't have a dictator in office because the principle of conservatism is limited government, lower taxes. The government to stay out of my life. My right to bear arms. It keeps your government in check, conservatism. The only way fascism is going to come into this country is through liberalism. Leftism, Yeah, you guys.
You know, this is a dangerous path to go down. They're working to create a narrative that insinuates that all conservative ideology is false and therefore it should be banned from all platforms. I mean, imagine this. Now being pro-life is somehow disinformation. Just because you disagree with something doesn't make it false information. This is a scary narrative that they are creating, Sean.
But Dinesh, I'll move on to you.
No,
a new op-ed by Max Boot in the Washington Post says that Trump couldn't have incited sedition without the help of Fox News. And President Biden needs to reinvigorate the FCC, or else terrorism, the terrorism that we saw on January 6th, may be only the beginning rather than the end of the plot against America. Dinesh, the new authoritarians now want government censorship after calling Trump it for years. They are now the real fascists.
So this is the threat. The threat is do what we want, or maybe we should just deplatform you. Maybe we should get rid of you. I mean, if you can't see the threat here, if you can't see the socially fascistic threat here, I don't know what you're watching. I don't know what country you're living in if you don't see the socially fascistic threat that has been materializing in extraordinarily rapid fashion. I mean, the Capitol riot was chum in the water to people who wanted to shut down freedom of speech and freedom of dissent.
There is not a more remarkable time in this country for patriots to stand up and fight than right now, when we are being turned into a Marxist, communist, socialist country right in front of our faces.
The key thing here is that the left, they are trying to do something that goes way beyond the election. The election was very close. The Democrats take the Senate very narrowly. They lose ground in the House, about 10 Republican seats. The presidential race was close. Now they're trying to take that, where they have no clear mandate, the country is evenly divided, and they're now trying to demonize and criminalize all the people who voted on the other side. They're trying to turn the opposition into a kind of captive population. And that's why all their analogies come from foreign wars. They talk about ISIS, they talk about Al-Qaeda, they talk about the Ba'ath Party. Well, basically, we deal with those people with bombs and with bullets. So they're acting like domestic critics. People who voted for Trump are foreign enemies and should be dealt with that way.
When I started at Facebook in 2015, the number one challenge from a content perspective was the abuse of social media by the Islamic State. And there was a collaboration between the tech companies and between the tech companies and law enforcement to make it impossible for them to use the internet to recruit and radicalize mostly young Muslim men at the time around the world. Now we're talking about domestic audience in the United States. And the challenge is going to be partially that, ISIS did not have a domestic constituency in the United States Congress. But there is over half of the Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the election. And there will be a continual political pressure on the companies to not take it seriously. So I think first you have to focus on those violent extremists, and those companies have to be brave in that way.
We on the right is radical simply for the fact that we're following the Constitution. You know what's crazy? He even compared us to ISIS. I mean, those people actually kidnap people and cut their heads off. They're terrorists. Man, you look at me, you see ISIS? Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. I mean, they're talking hyperbole. Like, it worked great with the president. You called him a white supremacist. People bought it without any proof. So now you're labeling people on the right as ISIS-like without any proof. And everybody on there is just nodding in agreement. Yep, that's ISIS.
All right, so you saw that, you heard that. Now, that was plain as day, okay? I don't want to hear anything from anybody about, oh, you conservatives, you snowflakes, you're crying. Nobody's trying to censor you. Nobody's trying to silence your voice. You're just extreme. You're just crazy. All this and that and the third. We know, those of us that are online, we know there's a specific anti-conservative bias on the internet, on television, everywhere. It's a specific anti-conservative bias that comes from the liberal mainstream media, like a CNN, CNBC, MS-13, DNC, even from Fox News to a certain extent, but definitely on a place like CNN, and definitely from big tech. We know this to be true.
But there is something else that's happening, and that is the continuation, the deepening, the broadening of a social culture of ostracization, marginalization, and quashing of dissent. That is America has always run along two tracks, right? One track is the governmental, and then there's the cultural. And when the culture of the United States is censorious, when the culture of the United States is one that does not tolerate dissent, when the culture of the United States ostracizes particular points of view, very often it is only a moment before that is actually encoded in legislation. And even without it being encoded in legislation, it can make your life absolutely miserable. If you are barred from jobs because of your political point of view, if you are barred from the use of social media, for example, because your viewpoints are now considered dangerous, not on the basis of you actually posing a danger, but on the basis that perhaps some nutty person could take your views and then twist them to get to a particular conclusion, and now you can be blamed for the violence. Well, the social situation in which you live is just going to be made worse and worse. The polarization is going to get wider and wider.
The mainstream media, who are 99.9% liberal, even on Fox to a certain extent, they're going to use that thing that happened at the Capitol as a weapon against us from years to come. As regular normie conservatives that don't even get online, they're not even involved with the political process aside from voting every 4 years, not even in the midterms. It'll be used against them. It'll be used against us that are on YouTube and everybody else.